In the heart of a vibrant European city, where history whispered through cobblestone streets and towering cathedrals, tourists from all corners of the globe flocked to catch a glimpse of the famed royal palace. The grand structure stood as a symbol of tradition, elegance, and centuries-old heritage. Every day, crowds gathered in the sprawling courtyard, their cameras clicking furiously as they marveled at the intricate architecture and the regal guards stationed outside the gates. Among the sea of visitors was Marcus Hale, a wealthy American businessman who had made his fortune in tech startups. Known for his flashy lifestyle and overbearing personality, Marcus strode into the courtyard like he owned the place. His designer suit caught the sunlight, and his gold watch gleamed as he gestured animatedly to his small entourage. He spoke loudly, criticizing everything around him. The statues were too old-fashioned. The gardens were overrated, and even the fountain didn't seem impressive enough to justify its existence. As Marcus moved closer to the palace entrance, his attention turned to the royal guards standing tall and immovable near the gates. Clad in pristine uniforms with polished buttons and bearskin hats, the guards were a sight to behold. Their stoic expressions and unwavering posture commanded respect, but Marcus saw them only as props in his tourist experience. To him, they were nothing more than costumed mannequins meant to entertain visitors. One guard in particular caught Marcus's eye, a man named Adrian Falk. Unlike some of the younger recruits, Adrian carried himself with an air of quiet confidence that came from years of service. A decorated veteran, Adrian had dedicated his life to protecting the monarchy and upholding the values it represented. His face was calm, his eyes focused straight ahead, betraying no hint of emotion despite the chaos swirling around him. Marcus, however, wasn't impressed. In fact, he found Adrian's silence infuriating. "What's wrong with you?" Marcus sneered, stopping just a few feet away from the guard. "Can't you talk? Or are you programmed to stand there like a robot?" His voice boomed across the courtyard, causing nearby tourists to glance nervously in their direction. Some exchanged awkward smiles, while others pretended not to notice. Adrian remained still, his training kicking in as he resisted the urge to react. For him, this wasn't about ego, it was about duty. He had faced far worse during his military career and knew better than to let someone like Marcus rattle him. But Marcus wasn't done yet. Emboldened by Adrian's lack of response, he stepped even closer, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the pavement. "You know what?" Marcus said, leaning in slightly. "Guys like you are useless. All you do is stand here looking pretty while real people work hard." His tone dripped with mockery, and a few members of his group chuckled nervously, unsure if they should join in or stay silent. The tension in the air grew thicker as Marcus continued his tirade. Tourists began to gather, forming a loose circle around the pair. Some watched with wide eyes, sensing that something was about to happen. Others recorded the scene on their phones, eager to capture whatever unfolded next. Little did they know, this encounter would become one of the most talked-about moments in the city's recent history. For now, though, Adrian simply stood there, his expression unreadable. If Marcus thought he could break the guard's composure, he was sorely mistaken. But deep down, Adrian knew that patience had its limits, and Marcus was quickly testing them. Marcus's taunts grew louder and more personal, each word dripping with disdain. He circled Adrian like a predator sizing up its prey, his expensive shoes clicking against the stone pavement. "What's the matter?" Marcus jeered, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the growing crowd. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too dumb to answer me?" Adrian didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on a distant point, as though Marcus wasn't even there. To an outsider, it might have seemed like indifference, but those who knew Adrian understood that this was his way of maintaining control. Every muscle in his body was taut, every nerve alert, yet he refused to give Marcus the satisfaction of a reaction. Still, Marcus wasn't one to back down when he sensed weakness, or what he perceived as weakness. "You're just a glorified statue," Marcus spat, waving a thick wad of cash in Adrian's face. "I bet you couldn't survive a day doing real work. All you do is stand here looking useless." The crumpled bills fluttered in the breeze, a stark contrast to Adrian's immaculate uniform. Some onlookers shifted uncomfortably, their discomfort palpable. Others exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch the spectacle unfold. But Marcus wasn't finished. His arrogance had reached a boiling point, and he was determined to leave his mark, literally. With a smirk that bordered on cruelty, Marcus leaned in closer, his breath hot against Adrian's cheek. Before anyone could react, Marcus spat directly onto Adrian's face. The act was deliberate, calculated to humiliate. Saliva glistened on Adrian's cheek under the bright sunlight, catching the horrified stares of the onlookers. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by uneasy silence. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Adrian's jaw tightened ever so slightly, the only sign that he had registered the insult. His hand twitched near his side, but he forced himself to remain still. Years of discipline screamed at him to stay composed, to remember the oath he had taken. This wasn't about him. It was about the institution he represented. Yet deep inside, something stirred. A flicker of anger, perhaps, or maybe a quiet resolve. Whatever it was, it burned steadily, waiting for the right moment. The crowd buzzed with whispered conversations. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, while others muttered disapproving comments about Marcus's behavior. A young woman nearby clutched her phone, recording the scene with wide eyes. Did he really just do that? She whispered to her companion, her voice tinged with shock. Her friend nodded grimly, unable to tear her gaze away from the unfolding drama. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the ripple of disapproval around him. Instead, he straightened up, brushing imaginary dust off his suit jacket as if he had just proven a point. "That's what you get for being disrespectful," he said smugly, turning to his friends with a triumphant grin. They laughed nervously, clearly uneasy but unwilling to challenge him. As Marcus strutted away, tossing a final sneer over his shoulder, Adrian blinked once, slowly. His breathing was steady, his posture unchanged. To anyone watching, he appeared unaffected, almost robotic in his composure. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Adrian's mind raced, replaying the insult not out of hurt, but out of calculation. He knew better than to let emotions dictate his actions, but he also knew that moments like these required subtle measures, a delicate balance between restraint and response. Unbeknownst to Marcus, the encounter was far from over. As he swaggered toward the palace gates, oblivious to the storm brewing behind him, Adrian subtly adjusted his stance. His polished boots shifted slightly against the stone, and his hands moved imperceptibly closer to his sides. Though outwardly calm, Adrian was preparing. For what? No one could say. But one thing was certain. Marcus Hale had no idea what he had just set into motion. Years passed, and the story of Marcus Hale and Adrian Falk became more than just a viral moment. It evolved into a timeless narrative etched into the fabric of the city's history. Visitors to the royal palace often paused near the spot where the infamous incident had taken place, imagining the tension that once filled the air. Some even left small notes or tokens of appreciation near the gates, honoring Adrian's quiet strength and the lessons his actions symbolized. For Marcus, the transformation was profound but ongoing. He dedicated himself to fostering cultural understanding, traveling to schools and community centers to share his story. "I used to think I was untouchable," he would say, standing before audiences young and old. But life has a way of teaching us humility when we least expect it. His talks weren't lectures. They were heartfelt reflections on growth, accountability, and the power of second chances. People listened intently, not because they pitied him, but because his journey felt relatable. Everyone makes mistakes. What mattered was how Marcus chose to rise above his. The foundation Marcus established grew into a global initiative, connecting people from diverse backgrounds, through travel scholarships and exchange programs. Students who benefited from these opportunities often spoke of moments when they realized their own biases and how meeting someone different from themselves changed their perspective forever. In a world increasingly divided by misunderstandings, Marcus's work served as a bridge, reminding people that empathy begins with listening. Adrian, meanwhile, lived out his retirement quietly, though his legacy loomed large. Young guards still training at the palace often heard stories about the man who stood firm against arrogance without losing his composure. To them, Adrian wasn't just a former guard. He was a symbol of integrity, proof that true courage lies in restraint. Even tourists recognized his name, asking guides if he ever visited the palace grounds. Occasionally, Adrian did return, not as a celebrated figure, but simply as a man grateful for a lifetime of service. Though their lives remained separate, Marcus and Adrian stayed connected through occasional letters. These exchanges were brief but meaningful, filled with updates and words of encouragement. Once, Marcus sent Adrian a photo of a mural painted by students in his foundation's program. It depicted two figures, one standing tall despite insult, the other bowing in apology, and bore the inscription, "Respect earned, lessons learned." Adrian kept the photo framed on his desk, a quiet reminder of the ripple effect kindness can create. Decades later, the city unveiled a plaque near the palace courtyard commemorating the incident. Its inscription read, "In this place, pride met humility, arrogance faced discipline, and both men walked away changed." Let this serve as a reminder that respect is earned, forgiveness heals, and growth is possible for all. The unveiling ceremony drew crowds, including Marcus, now older and grayer, and Adrian, walking with a slight limp but smiling warmly. As they stood side by side, the crowd erupted into applause, not for fame or fortune, but for the enduring message their story represented. Even today, the tale continues to inspire. Schoolchildren learn about it in classrooms, adults discuss it over dinner tables, and travelers share it as a cautionary yet hopeful anecdote. The incident reminds us that every action carries weight, that treating others with dignity isn't just polite, it's essential. And while Marcus never returned to the palace after the ceremony, he often spoke fondly of Adrian, calling him the man who changed my life. As for Adrian, he remained steadfast in his belief that true strength comes from within. Long after the uniforms were hung up and the boots polished one final time, he carried the values of honor and resilience into everything he did. For those fortunate enough to know him, Adrian wasn't just a guard. He was a guardian of principles worth protecting. And so, the story of Marcus and Adrian lives on, a testament to the idea that even the most unlikely encounters can leave an unforgettable mark, shaping not only individual lives, but also the collective heart of humanity. Months turned into years, and the story of Marcus Hale's encounter with Adrian Falk became a part of local lore. Tourists visiting the palace often asked about the guard who stood his ground, and guides would recount the tale with pride, emphasizing themes of discipline, humility, and redemption. It wasn't just a story about a single incident. It was a lesson wrapped in human emotion, one that resonated across cultures and generations. For Marcus, life after the incident was transformative. He returned to the United States determined to change not only how others saw him, but also how he viewed himself. At first, it was difficult. Friends and colleagues treated him differently, unsure whether to trust his newfound humility or dismiss it as temporary. Some mocked him behind his back, calling him the guy who got owned by a royal guard. Others gave him space, waiting to see if his actions matched his words. Marcus started small. He sold off some of his flashiest possessions, the gold watches, the luxury cars, and donated the proceeds to charities focused on education and cultural exchange programs. He began attending community events, not as a guest of honor, but as someone willing to listen and learn. Slowly, people noticed the shift. The loud, boastful businessman was replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful version of himself. He spoke less about his wealth and more about the importance of respect and understanding. One day, during an interview with a prominent news outlet, Marcus opened up about the lessons he had learned from his experience at the palace. "I used to think success meant power, being able to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "But that day taught me something different. Success isn't about money or status. It's about character. And my character needed work." His honesty struck a chord with viewers. Letters poured in from people around the world sharing their own stories of mistakes, growth, and second chances. Inspired by these responses, Marcus launched a foundation aimed at promoting cross-cultural understanding. Through scholarships, workshops, and travel grants, the program encouraged young people to explore new perspectives and appreciate traditions beyond their own. Meanwhile, Adrian continued serving as a royal guard, embodying the same values that had earned him admiration that fateful day. Promoted to a leadership role within his unit, he became a mentor to younger recruits, teaching them not just the technical skills required for the job, but also the importance of patience, dignity, and resilience. To those under his guidance, Adrian wasn't just a superior officer. He was a living example of what true strength looked like. Though their paths rarely crossed again, Marcus occasionally sent letters to Adrian, updating him on his efforts to give back to society. In return, Adrian replied with brief notes of encouragement, always signed with a simple phrase, "Keep moving forward." Their relationship remained professional yet respectful, built on mutual acknowledgement of the impact they'd had on each other's lives. Years later, when Adrian retired from service, Marcus flew back to the city to attend a private ceremony honoring his contributions. Standing among dignitaries and fellow guards, Marcus watched as Adrian received a medal for exemplary service. As their eyes met briefly, Marcus smiled, a genuine expression of gratitude. For both men, it was a moment of quiet closure, a reminder of how far they had come since that tense day in the courtyard. The story didn't end there, though. Schools began including the incident in history lessons, framing it as a modern parable about accountability and growth. Teachers emphasized the idea that even those who make mistakes can find redemption if they're willing to change. Meanwhile, memes and videos of Marcus's fall continued to circulate online, not as tools of ridicule, but as reminders that no one is above learning a hard lesson. Through it all, Adrian remained humble, never seeking recognition for his role in the incident. To him, it wasn't about fame or glory, it was about doing his duty and upholding the values he believed in. And for Marcus, the journey wasn't about erasing his past, but using it to build a better future. Together, albeit indirectly, they inspired countless individuals to reflect on their own actions and strive to be better versions of themselves. Marcus strutted away from Adrian, his head held high as though he had just won some invisible battle. His laughter echoed across the courtyard, bouncing off the ancient stone walls of the palace. To him, the act of spitting on Adrian's face wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of dominance, proof that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. After all, hadn't Adrian remained silent? Hadn't he stood there like a statue, unmoving and powerless? But Marcus didn't notice the subtle shift in Adrian's demeanor. The guard's posture, once rigid and unyielding, now carried a quiet intensity. His eyes, which had been fixed on a distant point moments earlier, now tracked Marcus with calculated precision. Every step Marcus took seemed to draw Adrian's focus tighter, like a hunter zeroing in on its target. As Marcus continued his loud commentary, mocking the palace architecture and boasting about his wealth, Adrian made his move, but it was so slight that only the keenest observers might have noticed. With barely a sound, Adrian shifted his weight forward ever so slightly, positioning himself directly in Marcus's path. It was a small adjustment, almost imperceptible, but it set the stage for what was about to happen. Marcus, oblivious to the change, kept walking backward as he gestured dramatically to his companions. "You see," he said, pointing at the palace gates, "this whole place is overrated. "I've seen better security at a shopping mall back home." His friends nodded along half-heartedly, their smiles strained as they tried to keep up with his bravado. But then, something unexpected happened. As Marcus stepped back again, his heel connected with Adrian's polished boot. The collision sent Marcus stumbling, his arms flailing as he fought to regain his balance. For a brief moment, he teetered precariously, his designer sunglasses sliding down his nose. Then, with a startled yelp, he landed hard on the ground, his expensive suit crumpling beneath him. The crowd erupted into gasps and murmurs. Some people covered their mouths in shock, while others struggled to stifle laughter. A few even clapped quietly, earning sharp glances from those around them. Marcus lay sprawled on the pavement for a split second before scrambling to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. What the hell was that? Marcus barked, spinning around to confront Adrian. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the mix of fury and humiliation bubbling inside him. When he saw Adrian standing there, still as a statue, his indignation doubled. "Did you trip me on purpose?" Marcus demanded, jabbing a finger toward Adrian's chest. Adrian didn't respond. His expression remained neutral, betraying nothing. Not amusement, not satisfaction, not even acknowledgement. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of quiet authority that made Marcus hesitate. For the first time since the encounter began, Marcus found himself unsure of how to proceed. Was Adrian really as indifferent as he seemed, or was there more to this stoic figure than met the eye? The tension between them crackled like electricity, drawing the attention of everyone in the courtyard. Tourists who had been snapping photos of the palace turned their cameras toward the unfolding drama. Parents whispered explanations to their children, framing the scene as a lesson in respect, or lack thereof. Even the other royal guards exchanged subtle glances, though none dared break formation to intervene. Marcus, however, couldn't let it go. He took a step closer to Adrian, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm talking to you," he shouted, his voice rising above the murmur of the crowd. "Answer me." Still, Adrian said nothing. His silence was deafening, a wall that Marcus couldn't penetrate no matter how hard he tried. Frustrated and humiliated, Marcus opened his mouth to retaliate further. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the chaos. "Is there a problem here?" The commanding tone belonged to Captain Ellis Hartman, the head of the Royal Guard unit. Her presence was immediate and authoritative, her polished uniform radiating professionalism. As she approached, the crowd parted instinctively, creating a clear path between her and Marcus. Marcus froze, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. His cheeks burned brighter as all eyes turned to him, waiting to see how he would respond. Adrian, meanwhile, remained perfectly still, his composure unshaken. Whatever happened next, it was clear that this confrontation was far from over, and Marcus was about to learn that crossing a royal guard came with consequences he hadn't anticipated. By the time Marcus Hale returned to his hotel room, the internet had already exploded with videos and memes of his humiliating tumble down the palace steps. Social media platforms were ablaze with commentary, hashtags like #RoyalGuardRespect and #TouristTakedown trending worldwide. Clips of Marcus shouting at Adrian, spitting on him, and finally falling in an undignified heap were shared millions of times. Memes mocked his bravado, with captions like, "When ego meets discipline, and gravity always wins." At first, Marcus tried to ignore it. He paced around his luxurious suite, muttering under his breath about how unfair the whole situation was. "They don't understand," he told himself, clutching a glass of whiskey. "I'm successful. I work hard for my money. Who are they to judge me?" But as hours passed, reality began to sink in. Notifications flooded his phone. Messages from friends, colleagues, and acquaintances, some offering awkward condolences, others barely hiding their amusement. Even worse, news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it "the day the rich tourist met his match." Unable to escape the backlash, Marcus turned to his laptop, searching for mentions of his name online. What he found shocked him. Comment sections were filled with scathing criticism, calling him entitled, arrogant, and disrespectful. Some defended Adrian, praising the guard's restraint and professionalism. Others pointed out that Marcus's actions weren't just rude. They symbolized a larger issue of privilege gone unchecked. One viral thread read, "This guy thinks wealth makes him untouchable." Spoiler alert, it doesn't. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly vulnerable, used to being admired, or at least envied. For his success, he now faced public ridicule on a global scale. It wasn't just strangers mocking him. Influential figures weighed in too. A popular talk show host joked about Marcus during a monologue, while the lifestyle magazine published an article titled "Lessons in Humility: What We Can Learn from That Palace Incident." The sheer volume of attention overwhelmed him, forcing him to confront something he hadn't considered before. Maybe he had been wrong. Determined to salvage his reputation, Marcus decided to take action. He reached out to Captain Elise Hartman through official channels, requesting a private meeting. To his surprise, she agreed, but only if Marcus came with genuine intentions. When they finally met in a quiet conference room near the palace, Marcus looked nothing like the brash man who had strutted into the courtyard days earlier. Dressed in a simple suit without his usual flashy accessories, he sat across from Captain Hartman, visibly nervous. "I owe you, and your team, an apology," Marcus began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "What I did was disrespectful and childish. I let my ego get the better of me, and I regret it deeply." He paused, glancing at Captain Hartman for a reaction. Her expression remained neutral, though her eyes softened slightly. Captain Hartman nodded slowly. "Apologies are meaningless unless they lead to change," she said. "Do you truly understand why your behavior was unacceptable?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I thought I was above consequences because of my wealth and status. But I see now that respect isn't something you can buy. It's earned. And I disrespected not just Adrian, but everything he stands for." Impressed by his sincerity, Captain Hartman arranged a meeting between Marcus and Adrian. The encounter took place in a secluded garden adjacent to the palace grounds. Adrian listened quietly as Marcus expressed his remorse, his tone humble and earnest. When Marcus finished, Adrian simply said, "Thank you for apologizing. Moving forward is more important than dwelling on the past." News of Marcus's apology spread quickly, adding another layer to the story. While some praised him for owning up to his mistakes, others remained skeptical, questioning whether his remorse was genuine or merely a PR move. Regardless, the incident sparked broader conversations about humility, accountability, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their role or position. For Marcus, the experience marked a turning point. Back home, he began making changes, focusing less on flaunting his wealth and more on fostering meaningful connections. Meanwhile, Adrian returned to his duties, embodying the same grace and discipline that had inspired admiration worldwide. Though their worlds remained vastly different, both men carried the lessons of that day with them, a reminder that even the smallest acts of respect, or disrespect, can leave a lasting impact. Marcus lay sprawled on the ground for a moment, his expensive suit crumpled and his sunglasses dangling precariously from one ear. The fall had been hard, jarring enough to knock the wind out of him. As he struggled to sit up, his face burned with a mix of pain, embarrassment, and fury. The crowd around him buzzed with murmurs, some sympathetic but most laced with quiet amusement. A few people even covered their mouths to hide smiles, while others openly chuckled at the spectacle. Captain Elise Hartman didn't move an inch. She stood tall, her arms crossed over her chest, watching Marcus with an expression that was equal parts authority and disdain. Her silence spoke volumes, making it clear that she had no intention of helping him up or offering sympathy. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about sending a message. Respect mattered here, and disrespect would not be tolerated. Finally, Marcus managed to scramble to his feet, brushing dust off his clothes, as though trying to reclaim some shred of dignity. But his movements were frantic, almost desperate, betraying the storm of emotions raging inside him. He shot a venomous glare at Adrian, who remained stoic and unmoving, before turning his attention back to Captain Hartman. "This is outrageous," Marcus shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at her. "You let your man attack me. I'm going to report this. No, I'm going to sue this entire palace. Do you know how much money I have? I'll make sure none of you keep your jobs after today." His threats hung in the air like smoke, heavy but ultimately empty. No one reacted, not Captain Hartman, not Adrian, not even the other guards standing nearby. The only response came from the crowd, where a few people exchanged skeptical looks. One elderly tourist muttered loud enough for those around him to hear, "Good luck suing history." Captain Hartman finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting. "Sir," she said, stepping forward slightly, "if you wish to file a complaint, there are proper channels for that. However, I must warn you. Any investigation will include reviewing the events leading up to this moment, including footage captured by dozens of witnesses." She gestured subtly toward the crowd, many of whom still held up their phones, recording every second of the confrontation. Marcus's face paled slightly as the reality sank in. He hadn't considered the cameras, or the fact that his actions might already be immortalized online for the world to see. His bravado wavered, and for a brief moment, he looked unsure of what to do next. Should he double down on his accusations, or should he cut his losses and leave? Before he could decide, Captain Hartman delivered the final blow. "Let me remind you," she continued, her tone softening ever so slightly but still firm, "that these guards dedicate their lives to protecting something far greater than themselves. They endure long hours, harsh conditions, and countless insults, all without complaint. And yet you chose to treat them with contempt. Tell me, sir, does that truly reflect the kind of person you want to be?" Her words struck a nerve. For all his wealth and arrogance, Marcus wasn't immune to guilt or shame. He opened his mouth to retort, but nothing came out. Instead, he glanced around at the sea of faces surrounding him, searching for support but finding none. Even his own companions seemed reluctant to meet his gaze, their earlier laughter replaced by awkward discomfort. Realizing he had no allies left, Marcus straightened his tie and smoothed his jacket, attempting to salvage whatever scraps of pride he could. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low and clipped. "I don't need this nonsense. You haven't seen the last of me, though." With that, he turned on his heel and marched away, his steps hurried and uneven. As Marcus disappeared into the crowd, Captain Hartman turned to Adrian, giving him a small nod of approval. "Well done," she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. Adrian responded with the slightest tilt of his head, acknowledging her praise without breaking character. To anyone else, he appeared as unshakable as ever, but those who knew him well could see the faintest hint of relief in his eyes. The crowd lingered for a few moments longer, buzzing with excitement over what they had witnessed. Some clapped softly, while others whispered animated discussions about the incident. Within minutes, videos of Marcus's fall began circulating online, quickly gaining traction as people around the world tuned in to watch the rich tourist get his comeuppance. For Captain Hartman and her team, life returned to normal almost immediately. The royal guards resumed their posts, standing tall and unwavering, as though nothing unusual had happened. But for Marcus Hale, the day marked the beginning of a reckoning, one that would force him to confront not only his behavior, but also the image he had built for himself. Little did he know, the hardest part was Captain Elise Hartman's arrival felt like a thundercloud cutting through the tension in the courtyard. Her polished boots clicked against the stone pavement as she strode toward Marcus and Adrian with an air of authority that demanded respect. Every step she took radiated confidence, her posture straight and her gaze piercing. The gold insignia on her uniform gleamed under the sunlight, marking her as someone who commanded both power and discipline. "Is there a problem here?" she asked again, her voice sharp yet measured. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. She stopped a few feet away from Marcus, her eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed the situation. Her presence immediately shifted the dynamic, drawing all attention to her. Even Marcus, who had been brimming with rage just moments earlier, faltered under her steely gaze. Marcus opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. For once, his usual bravado seemed to desert him. Instead, he stammered, This guy tricked me." He pointed an accusing finger at Adrian, who remained silent and motionless, his face betraying no emotion. Captain Hartman didn't even glance at Adrian. Her focus stayed locked on Marcus, her expression unreadable. "I see," she said coolly, tilting her head slightly. "And what exactly were you doing before that?" Her tone carried a note of skepticism, as though she already knew the answer but wanted Marcus to admit it aloud. Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the directness of her question. He glanced around at the crowd, which had grown larger and more attentive. Phones were out, recording every word and movement. Realizing he was being watched, not just by bystanders, but potentially by millions online, Marcus straightened up, trying to regain some semblance of control. "What I was doing? I was just pointing out how ridiculous this whole setup is," he said defensively, gesturing toward the palace gates. "Your guards are useless. They don't even talk." Captain Hartman raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint smirk that wasn't friendly. It was calculated. "Useless," she echoed, letting the word hang in the air for a moment. Then, without missing a beat, she added, "Perhaps you'd like to explain why one of my guards has saliva on his face." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Marcus's face flushed red. He hadn't expected anyone to call him out so bluntly. "That's none of your business," he shot back, though his voice lacked conviction. He adjusted his tie nervously, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of everyone's stares. "It is my business," Captain Hartman replied firmly, taking a step closer to Marcus. "You see, these guards represent not only themselves but also the institution they serve. When you disrespect them, you disrespect centuries of tradition, hard work, and sacrifice. And frankly, sir, your behavior today has been unacceptable." Her words hit like a hammer, leaving Marcus speechless. For the first time, he realized the gravity of what he had done. His insults, his arrogance, his deliberate attempt to humiliate Adrian. It all came crashing down on him in that moment. But instead of backing down, Marcus doubled down, his ego refusing to let him admit fault. "You can't talk to me like that," he snapped, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am? I'm a successful businessman. I could buy this entire palace if I wanted to." Captain Hartman didn't flinch. If anything, her demeanor grew even colder. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "your wealth means nothing here. What matters is respect, for others, for history, and for the values we uphold. Now, I suggest you leave before this situation escalates further." The finality in her tone left no room for argument. Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he processed her words. He looked around, searching for support from his companions or even the crowd, but found none. Everyone was watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. Some looked sympathetic, but most simply appeared eager to see justice served. Realizing he had no allies and no way to save face, Marcus muttered something under his breath and stormed off toward the palace steps. As he ascended, muttering about filing complaints and demanding apologies, Adrian subtly moved behind him. With precise timing, Adrian stomped lightly on the edge of the top step, causing Marcus to lose his balance once again. This time, the fall was louder, more dramatic, and utterly humiliating. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, and gasps erupted from the crowd as Marcus tumbled down the stairs, landing in an undignified heap. Captain Hartman didn't react, maintaining her composure as though nothing unusual had happened. Adrian returned to his post, his expression unchanged. And Marcus, sprawled on the ground, finally understood. He had picked the wrong fight and lost.